Welcome to another brand new episode of Crash Chords Autographs. I, of course, am Matt, aka Stormageddon. And, of course, before we get into this week's episode, as usual, I would love to shout out my Patreon supporters, Rob, Frankie, Emily, Greg, and Case. If you would like to get a shout out at the top of the show, you can go to patreon.com/Stormageddon. There are a bunch of different tiered rewards at a variety of levels. But if you can't do that, a like, a subscribe, a rating, a review, all of that helps as well. I'm so excited for you to hear this episode, as I am excited almost every episode. But this one is particularly special because my guest is the incredible Evan Ross Katz, who I very recently started working together with to bring to life season 2 of Shut Up Evan, his incredible interview podcast. I'm so excited to be producing this show and working on the show with Evan and even being a voice on the episodes. It's been so exciting and so refreshing. And while this whole interview is really great, and we talk a lot about Evan's history and how he got into writing and how he got into podcasting, I'm also just really excited to have him on because I've admired him for a while, and I'm really excited to get to talk about this podcast that I've joined for the second season. So enough from me. Let's dive right in. Here is my incredible interview with the brilliant, handsome, and charming Evan Ross Katz. So let's start from the beginning. Evan Ross Katz, I'm so excited to have you on Autographs. This is a pleasure to flip the script on you, as typically I am the producer for your incredible show, Shut Up Evan, where you are the host. So first of all, thank you for taking the time to chat with me
My
today.
pleasure. I do want to correct you and say it is our show. You tend to call it my show. It is our show. But yes, but thank you so much for having me.
I'm sure this comes to as a shock to you, being an artist of a kind and experiencing with artists that someone being like putting themselves down and not wanting to take credit, that must be completely unfamiliar to you.
Yes,
You must not
never,
see that.
never.
So first, let's talk about our show, Shut Up Evan, which I came on for season 2. The first thing I really want to ask about, because a lot of people, like when it came back, people were insanely excited and had missed it greatly. It had been on hiatus for a little bit, while you ramped up for season 2. I want to go back to the beginning of Shut Up Evan. Where did the idea for Shut Up Evan come from and the origins of the podcast? Because for those who don't know, it's a chat show, not unlike Autographs, where Evan and I love your tagline for the show, which is about gay shit and pop culture, which is like, it just gets to the point. But where did the idea for the show come from? What inspired you to start it?
So it's an interesting kind of roundabout trajectory that happened. So basically, I was working for a company at the time called Mike.com, which I like to say does not exist anymore, but it does exist, but the version of the website that I worked for does not. And so for all intents and purposes.
Okay.
And actually, LOL, for season 1, we used to call it because Alden, my former producer, and I both came from Mike, and we used to call it like the site that shall not be named. But so I was working at Mike at the time. I was the senior style editor. And this was at the very beginning of Facebook Live. And Mike signed a deal with Facebook Live that required us to do like X amount of hours on Facebook Live per week. And so every vertical at Mike was assigned 1 hour a week. And you could do whatever you wanted. You just had to fill that hour. And as my writers, I had 2 writers at the time under me, and neither of them wanted to appear on camera. And I was not like overly keen to appear on camera. I just was I didn't think a lot of people were going to be watching it. And I'm very comfortable. It's hard to make me feel uncomfortable. So I was like, okay, we'll do this. And so I had to sort of generate, okay, well, what am I going to do for an hour? And so in the beginning, it was like a lot of inviting friends of mine to come in and shoot the shit. And then slowly I remember I invited Dorinda, who's one of the more popular Real Housewives of New York. I invited her to come on, and we did that, and like that kind of generated some traction. And so I was like, oh, let me invite Luann, another one of the Real Housewives. And so that generated some traction. But things really like took off when I invited Trixie and Katya to come and do an interview we kind of had, at that point, the videos had started to sort of take off and they were becoming more produced. Mike was putting more resources behind them. I was like filming like segments for promoting Facebook Live at that point. And basically that Trixie Katya interview just blew up in large part because it's insane. But also after the fact, months and months after the fact, we learned that, and this is known, so I'm not giving any information away that the person would not want, but Katya was in a drug-induced state at the time of our interview. And so there's a chaoticness about the interview that I think is just, you kind of can't look away. It's not like a car crash, nothing like bad happens in the interview. It's just a really wild interview. So anyway, long story made medium length, that it was just basically from those mic interviews. And then like we kind of just kept being able to book bigger and bigger people. And I got more and more comfortable doing it. Everyone was laid off of mic. I was kind of doing my freelance writing, and I just sort of missed doing the interviews. And I had a lot of people asking me about them. And so we just were sort of like, I called Alden up because we had been working together. He was my producer on those videos. And we were like, let's just kind of do this and, you know, hit record and see what happens. I knew nothing about podcasts. I can't say I know a ton more now. But yeah, it was basically, the idea was just sort of to continue the work that we were doing. But I just understood that like the video production aspect of what we were doing at Mike was incredibly expensive. And in my mind, podcasts would be way cheaper and easier. Can't confirm if that's true. But so yeah, it was basically born as like a quote unquote spin-off of sorts of the work we were doing at Mike.
That's really cool. And did you ever fancy yourself an interviewer? Like, is that a thing that you wanted to do, be a presenter or be an interviewer?
No, but I am just a very curious person by nature. And it's the one thing I can always kind of think back to like my early days of like writing is it's like, when I had to interview someone for like a story, and it wouldn't necessarily be like a profile, but someone included in a larger story, like generating the questions was always so easy. And even now with my current job, sometimes we'll be like doing talent asks and we'll have to like generate a list of questions, and questions just kind of come naturally to me. And over time, I wanted to finesse sort of like what an Evan Ross Katz question would be. And so And so I just kind of, that became for me about doing a lot of research and knowing my subject better than they knew themselves in a sense. And I think I just kind of, there were a couple of moments early on, especially with those mic interviews, when I had moments where I felt like we were going somewhere. I felt a kinetic energy in an interview, and it wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't say I am like good at interview, but I will say I think people in interview settings tend to surrender to me easily. And that's not, and I say that very carefully to say that's not a compliment to myself but I just find that for whatever reason, I think if I were to look at it from the outside, I think people have an easy time even that makes me uncomfortable to say because I feel like there's a little bit of praise in that. I found that people liked talking to me.
Well, I will praise you since you don't want to do it yourself. And in my experience with the interviews I've sat on, which there have been 4 of the 5 episodes we've recorded already, spoilers, coming for Shut Up Evan, but you are incredibly easy to talk to. You give this air of comfort, and I think even in the moments when you're asking harder questions because you want to get to the bottom of something or see if you can give voice to something that maybe someone couldn't say somewhere else, there's still a comfort in it. Like you always tell the guest what I told you before we started recording, like if there's anything you need cut or whatever, let me know. And like it has come up, but for the most part, at least during the interview, no one's gone in the interview, oh shit, I didn't want to say that. Like I think there's just this comfortability with talking to you, and I think it comes from you knowing, first of all, knowing your subject so well. Like your show is very conversational, but you still create sheets of questions that you want to ask, and you don't necessarily ask them all, but you have this kind of layout of what you are interested in. But you also do deep dives on those personalities, those people, because you want to ask questions that they haven't really asked before. Like what's aired by the time people will hear this, our first episode of the new season with Olivia Wilde, what's really great is both you and I asked a lot of questions that I don't think she heard a lot. Like, of course, we talked about Booksmart, and of course, we talked about her early days of acting. But like, I asked her about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. You asked her very specific things about things she's posted on her Instagram or in other places. And I think that's what really engages someone you're interviewing is that you really care about the conversation.
Yeah, and I think also like, can I spoil an episode that's coming up?
I mean, I don't care. It's your show.
Okay.
It's our show, but it's up to you.
Okay, so we have an episode coming up. Our next guest is Chloe Fineman, who's one of the stars of SNL, and she's really known for her impressions, both on SNL and on Instagram. And as I was gearing up to do it, I always try and go to the bottom of a person's Instagram page. That to me is so important. I do that with anyone I interview. It depends on, I just feel like you can't get to the bottom of someone's Twitter, but like with Instagram, you really can see the beginning. And anyway, I ended up finding a lot of these old impressions that Chloe did before she was Chloe Fineman of today, in which anything she posts has a built-in virality to it. And being able to ask Chloe questions about an impression that she did in 2017, which is not that long ago, but is way before she was famous because she's very new to this sort of fame. Being able to ask about that, it's like a moment where it's like I could see her understanding the fact that I knew her, that I had taken the time to get to know her on a deeper level. And I think that establishes something where it's like, you took the time to get to know, you took the time to give to me, so I will give to you in exchange. And that's the environment I try to foster.
Sure. Have there been any interviews that you did in the first season, since I wasn't around for those, that didn't go the way you had planned, or maybe someone had kind of pushed back in a way that you weren't expecting?
Yeah. I mean, we shot the pilot so in May 2019 with Trixie Mattel. And so Trixie is an old friend of mine, and I figured we had done that Mike interview together, and that Mike interview had blown up, and I was like, she is the perfect first guest. And at that point, I didn't quite know what Shut Up Evan was going to be. And so we rented a studio. She came in. It was so nice of her to take the time. And when I got the episode back, I just felt like I was not a presence in the episode at all. You didn't get to know me in any way. I felt very anonymous to me. And I can be a difficult critic of myself, but I also, especially now, it's like I know when I like what I do. And like I do have those moments quite a bit. And this had none of them. And I also felt like, and this is something I kind of still think about today, it felt like Trixie had done so many interviews that she had finessed the art of interview. Yeah. And that is very uninteresting to me. And so as much as I tried to go deeper or find questions she hadn't been asked, I just felt like she was such a conversationalist. And I know usually it would be like, oh, isn't that a great thing? It didn't jive with my vision for the show. And I had such a feeling about it that I decided to can it entirely and reshoot the pilot months later. But that's an interview, and she didn't do anything wrong. Right. Like, it's not anything like that whatsoever. But one of my takeaways from that interview, I don't like interviewing someone when they're having a moment. And so even I would say borderline with our Shay interview. Yeah. Because it's like Shay is in the middle of being interviewed quite a bit because they just won Drag Race. They have to do a lot of interviews. Whereas we have an interview coming up with Jimbo, and we did that interview like about a month after he had his final episode of Drag Race, and like the sort of like the Jimbo renaissance, if you will, had sort of it had died down a bit. And that interview, and I was gonna do that one while he was still on the show, and I'm so glad I waited. And my takeaway, and again, why I think the Olivia interview is so good, because it's like she's not in a press cycle right now. Right. She's not flexing that muscle, and I actually find that I can do a lot better work when I feel like they're not as in it, you know?
Yeah, I totally get that. I feel like, especially with, and I hate the term content creation, whatever the F that means, you have to be happy with it ultimately. If you're not happy with what you're putting out, or you're not interested, why would anyone else be interested? And I've had some interviews, especially in the early days of this show, when I was just trying to grab anybody, and like I listen back to the conversation, I'm like, well, this isn't great, but I need an episode, so I'll put it out. Whereas now I wouldn't do that. Thankfully, I've had a ton of incredible guests, and I tend to reach out now just to the people I know I want to talk to. But I think it's so important to be so aware of the kind of thing you're making, and that you enjoy it to some degree, Because if you don't, why would someone else?
Yeah. And I also feel like the one thing I trust like very much and always kind of have is I trust my taste.
Yeah.
And so when something is sort of like not up to snuff with my taste, I'll get a second and a third opinion. I'm not saying like but I do, when I get that initial instinct where something is off, I know it. And with that one, I just was like, this is not the pilot. And I feel like the pilot's such an important episode. So that's one instance, but otherwise I've had interviews that, are not like, I think some are more electric than others.
Yeah.
And I definitely have ones that I feel like go to a place that I'm really proud of. And when I say I'm proud of it, it's like I'm proud of facilitating an environment in which the guests felt so free to share. I think the one that comes to mind, I realize I'm answering the opposite of your question, but
it's fine.
So Charisma Carpenter, who's one of the original cast members from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, came on the show, and there was like and we had a phone call the night before the interview, in which she kind of mentioned some things that she didn't want to talk about. And I was like, and I had told her, I was like, tell me this so I know. But there was one sort of like thing hanging over my head, and she did not include this on the Do Not Ask list. And it was kind of like, there are all these rumors about her being fired from Angel, which is the spinoff series of Buffy, her being fired from Angel for being pregnant. And I was like, I really wanted to have that conversation because it's always bothered me as a viewer of the show. And I felt like not only did she answer the question, but it just felt like the unresolved, I'm going to call it anger, but that's just my perception. The unresolved anger, it came out in that interview in a way that I found really like remarkably vulnerable. And that is like, when I think of like interviews that I'm really, really proud of, I'm really proud of that, but I'm also grateful for Charisma for coming in with such an open heart and like allowing that story to be told. And yeah, that's one that really comes to mind that I'm especially proud of.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that one because when I first got, so we were connected through a mutual friend, Abu Zafar, who I love. Lore Pottery Podcast Network is phenomenal. My podcast network that I'm on is actually going to pair up with Lore Party in November to do some special stuff for Cyberpunk. But Abu is great, and he connected us. And when I first heard your name, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you guys should chat. I think you'd hit it off," which he was absolutely right, and we owe him dearly for that.
True.
The first episode I listened to was the Charisma Carpenter episode because I'm a longtime Buffy and Angel fan. And when I saw that you had interviewed her, it's like to me, like I still get struck by folks like her. It's funny, bigger celebrities don't always do that to me, but the ones from like cult TV shows or like are at a certain level, like I lose my mind over, and she's one of them. She's just phenomenal. And I listened to that interview first of all your interviews, and I was just like, this is unbelievable. It's incredible. And I agree with you. I think there's an electricity in that conversation that you couldn't have possibly predicted. Like, you know who she is, and you know she's a lovely person, and I've seen her on chat shows, but there was some kind of unidentifiable electricity to that interview that like is just almost hard to explain.
Yeah, I concur.
So obviously you've been writing for a long time. You were a writer before you were a podcaster. Did you go to school for writing? Is like journalism and writing a thing you've always been destined to do, or is it just something you kind of like most people fell face first into?
Yeah, no, I don't think I don't think I fell. I think I tripped. But yeah, no, I went to theater school. I went to New York University. I pursued a degree in theater directing. And then I think I've never really jived with theater people. And I say that with the understanding that like I am a theater person. Right. So I'm not saying this with any sort of elitist mentality, because I am one of the people that I say I don't quite jive. So my psychiatrist can delve into that. But so I think it was around like my junior year when I kind of saw so much theater being made and so little theater being consumed that something felt off to me in terms of making this like a sustainable career path. And I also was just feeling like there weren't like stories I wanted to tell in the theater space, because the kind of theater felt so exclusionary just in terms of like the attendees. And I've always been so interested. I love talking to people outside of my area of interest. One of my biggest passions is like talking to people that think that they don't care about fashion and helping
Right.
show them that they care. And so anyway, so I around my senior year, I was like, I made the decision after, shelling out the $200,000+ for New York University to not pursue the degree that I had shelled out that money for. My parents were thrilled. And I decided to go into fashion. My friend group was largely consumed of people within the fashion industry. And what I always say is all of like the stereotypes of the fashion industry, like the Devil Wears Prada of it all, are so antithetical to the fashion industry that I have experienced over the last decade.
Sure.
And I didn't know a ton about fashion, but I knew and trusted my taste. And so I think I had a sense of humor that it's not that fashion writing is humorless, but it's fashion writing in general, not always, tends to take itself rather seriously and tends to view the industry rather seriously. And I liked using my voice to poke fun at a lot of the shortcomings and problematic aspects of the fashion industry, such as the lack of models of color, the lack of plus size models, the models of differently abled people. I thought that there was a way to both like praise a runway show that I loved the fashions on while also reading them for not including more diverse models on the runway. I thought you could do both at once.
Right.
I didn't think it was like so binary as like this brand. It's like this happened recently with the Versace runway because they have 3 plus size models and people were like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I was like, that's bullshit. But also those 3 plus size looks like work. I loved all 3 of them. So anyway, I kind of started pursuing fashion and I started doing a lot of fashion writing. And then the pop culture writing, I think, came through fashion outlets wanting me to cover pop culture more because pop culture gets more clicks than fashion. And I also was just someone who I've always been a consumer of culture, both popular and what's like the kind of culture I'm interested in. It's not like it's not zeitgeisty pop culture, but it's within pop culture, but sometimes like in the annals of pop culture, if you will. And I think that the internet used to be a little more Wild Westy, but it was easier to have a unique voice because there wasn't just as much competition. And so I think I came up at a very lucky time. I started writing on the internet around 2012, 2013. And I found mild success, and Sam Lansky, who is the West Coast editor of Time magazine, bless him, gave me one of my first big writing gigs. And what he told me at the time, and I always tell this to writers now, it's like, Sam told me it takes 3 writing gigs. You need to get your byline on 3 different publications, and then you'll be set. And so I wrote for free for the Huffington Post, as a lot of writers of my generation did. And then I wrote for a fashion magazine, a British fashion magazine called Essential Homme. And then I did recapping of the final season of Jersey Shore for a website called Wet Paint.
Nice.
And I just remember I was like, okay, this is the trifecta. I've made it. And, the rest is somewhat history.
Somewhat history. Yeah. I think it's always funny to me being married to an actress and having a lot of friends both in theater and film and music. It's like people outside any artistic industry are like, oh, overnight success, everyone just blows up. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. And like even now with podcasting, like I got unreasonably mad. I think it was last year, this year. I don't know. Time is a lake at this point. It doesn't make any sense anymore. But when Conan launched his new podcast, Conan Needs a Friend, which I love. I'm a fan of Conan. He was on the cover of some magazine, not even rich, going, essentially saying that Conan invented podcasting. Like he made podcasting big. And I was like, excuse me, I've been doing this for almost a decade. What are you talking about? He made his podcast big because he had an audience already. He stepped into an existing audience, but podcasting's been around a long time, and it just drove me a little nutty, even though it was not even Conan's fault because he didn't write the article. But it was just like, yes, just because a celebrity steps into a thing and it becomes huge doesn't mean they made it huge. It's been around.
Yeah. I remember that article.
Yeah. And like, again, it wasn't Conan's fault. He probably had no idea.
No, and there's a version of that article, or there's a version of that same sort of story. I believe it was 2016 when some publication did a headline saying Kylie Jenner invented wigs, was the headline. And I remember similarly, it was like, no, she didn't.
Nope.
She did not.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about pop culture, because okay. So for one, if you are listening to this now and you are familiar with Evan, you already know this, but for my listeners who may not, you might have a little bit of an infatuation with Sarah Michelle Gellar. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious where that stems from, because like we all have legends that we stand. There's always that one person that no matter what, reasonably, you will love their work. For me, that person for the longest time has been Hugh Jackman, for absolutely no reason other than A, he's an incredible singer, B, he is very attractive, and C, he played my favorite comic book character, Wolverine, for quite a long time. And so like I followed him to everything. I watched his live tours. I saw him in The Boy from Oz, like the only kid in the line to get an autographed copy of the CD, the soundtrack for Boy from Oz, wearing an X-Men t-shirt, whereas everyone else was there because they were musical theater fans. And I was like, I loved the musical, but I also just loved him. So I get the sense that you followed Sarah through her career. What is it that really drew you to her?
It's so complicated. And it's complicated in that like I both know exactly what it is, and then at the same time I'm kind of like, there's just something about her. I remember, like my earliest memory of Sarah Michelle Gellar was the 6th episode of the 2nd season of Buffy. I had no idea who she was. I was watching something in my parents' bedroom, flipping through the channels on a commercial, and came across Buffy. And I had to, so I would have been like 9, I want to say. And immediately I saw these vampires, and my mother was like, turn that off. And I remember running into the basement and putting the episode on and finishing it. And I remember that became this was Monday at 9 p.m. because the show would transition to Tuesday at 8 p.m. a few weeks later. But it began Monday at 9 p.m. Every Monday at 9, I would go down there, and I became really infatuated with the character of Buffy. This was like kind of before I was like bullied, but this was the beginnings of like being criticized for being effeminate. And I remember thinking, wow, like Sarah Michelle Gellar is like the paradigm of femininity. She's like this female butt kicker. And so I think as someone who was being labeled feminine, that became sort of like the desire. Well, if I'm going to be feminine, I want to be the best version of feminine. And that's Sarah Michelle Gellar. And I obviously like over time fell in love with the show, but I've always said like I am a Sarah Michelle Gellar fan way before I am a Buffy fan, because for every episode, like I would say of the 144 episodes of Buffy, there are 100 that I love and 44 that I would never want to watch again.
That's
and
fair.
That ratio is that's how I see it. And so like I'm doing a rewatch with my boyfriend right now, and like we're about to watch the season 4 episode, for anyone that knows the show, Where the Wild Things Are, and I'm like putting it off just because it's like, like just a slog. Anyway, so I became really into her film work at the time, which in the beginning was like Scream 2, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Cruel Intentions. And I don't know like how it just kind of grew and grew and grew. It became my bar mitzvah was Sarah Michelle Gellar themed. I had 2 Japanese stand-up dolls at my bar mitzvah. I still have both of them now.
Amazing.
And then like life sort of happens in a funny way, and we first crossed paths. It's too long of a story to really get into. Over email in 2015, I did a favor for her through a mutual friend, and she sent me a thank you email. And that was like my world stopped. But we met for the first time in 2017. I was invited by the team at Watch What Happens Live to attend a taping of Watch What Happens Live that she was going to be at. And so I was and this was right before my birthday, and I was going to be in the same room as her. And I remember when she walked in the room, and like just everything sucks. It's a very small room. And they put me in the very front row. There's 2 chairs. They're chairs from the Oprah Winfrey show that Andy Cohen has in his studio. And they put me and my best friend Kevin in those chairs. And so it goes to commercial break. I'm hyperventilating. I have my camera up. I'm
Uh-huh.
trying to get all the footage. And Andy turns to me and he goes, "Have you met her?" And I was like, "No, but I don't want to." And that was like my thing. It's just like, don't meet your hero.
Of course, absolutely.
And he grabs me at that point and he brings me over to her. And that's the first time we met. We've met subsequently several times since. I've interviewed her for Oprah Magazine. She sends me a birthday card every April 10th for my birthday. I help her with her Instagram sometimes. We have this very funny, I am in her phone. We have a funny, it's not a friendship per se, but I will say, I think that she finds me very funny, and if nothing else, there's a version of this story in which she finds me psychotic or like doesn't really get it. But I will say, to my understanding, I could be totally wrong, but like I will never forget when I walked into the hotel room for the Oprah interview. This was 2019. The first thing she said was like, "Oh my God, you have as long until the security comes up to escort you out to like finish the interview." Just because like she gets
knows,
the fact that it's an insane obsession, but she finds it funny. And yeah, but I mean, it's just kind of like, she is the thing. I've said this before, but it's like, before I think of myself as gay, before I think of myself as Jewish, before I think of myself as American, it's like she is the thing that has been with me for the longest time, that I've identified my personality with. And, nowadays everyone sort of stands this thing and that thing, and I'm a this and blah, blah, blah. But like, I am a stan. This was before the word was popularized. I mean, this was the early iteration, the Eminem, Devin Sawa stan, when the term first came out. And when I say that, it's like, I could put it to you this way. If Sarah Michelle Gellar were to come out right now at 6:02, and if there was a Google alert, which I would get, saying Sarah Michelle Gellar and Freddie Prinze Jr. are getting a divorce, I'm just saying, if that were to happen, oh my God, knock on fucking wood that it won't.
No.
If that were to happen, I would cancel my plans tonight, and I would go into a state of mourning. And like, LOL, like I get the hyperbole in that statement, but it's also like really true. She's just, you pick a person, and I'm loyal as fuck, and she is my person, and I will sink with that ship. And I love her. I love her. I love her.
And that's amazing. I think that's really sweet and really awesome. And it's funny you met...
And creepy.
And creepy. It's funny you mentioned Freddie Prinze Jr., who I've always been a fan of, but I fell in love with very deeply recently because I found out he's the kind of nerd I am. So one of my podcasts called Reignite is about the Mass Effect video game franchise. And he's a big, big nerd. He's played a character in that franchise, in the Dragon Age franchise, and like he's a big Star Wars nerd. Recently, an interview went viral where he was shitting on all of these, rightfully so, stupid Star Wars fans who are like, this isn't real, you can't do it. Like, he set them straight, and I love him for it. But it's fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad he doesn't do anything problematic.
No.
Okay.
He's been great so far. One never knows these days. But that said, like, Sarah Michelle Gellar is someone who I was a diehard fan of for a long time, and then just kind of disappeared from my periphery as she has just moved on to other things. And it's funny because I remember there was you mentioned the other day, we were doing an interview that I'm really excited to come out, but you mentioned a show she did with Robin Williams, that I'm blanking on the name of, that it was on
The Crazy Ones.
The Crazy Ones, that was on CBS, I believe. And like, I remember I tuned into that show for Robin Williams. I've loved that man forever. I deeply miss his humor and his comedy and his light. But I remember tuning into that show just because I was like, this is going to be whatever it is. It's just big names and I want to see it. I ended up falling in love with that show, and it didn't get an extra season. It didn't get extra time. And like, that's the last vivid memory I have of her, is watching that show.
Yeah, she's just, I love her work so much. I look forward to her continued acting career. She has a bunch of projects in the works right now, but I love, not only do I love her, but I love to love her. And I love how much it's just, I've kind of built, like, she is a part of my online identity to the point where it's just, people will tag, just today, I think there's this like, Instagram nostalgia account that posts like 90s stuff. And they posted a picture of Sarah Michelle Gellar in New York City. And the amount of people that just tagged me in it, and that makes me so happy, because it's like, if nothing else, it's like the fact that people think of me when they think of her means that I've done the job, job complete.
No, totally. I mean, that's pretty much the same thing that's happened with the Mass Effect franchise, which is supposed to be getting remasters, new games soon, but who knows? Like, every time there's any article rumoring that these games are going to get like re-released, I get tagged by like 30 people in it, because they know I love it and I do something that involves it. And for people who don't know you that well, to know you love this thing and want to share it with you, as loopy as it is, I get some sense of camaraderie or like love from that in a way that is really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's also like I'm both really earnest and in on the joke of it. So it's like when I say that I think Sarah Michelle Gellar is on par with Meryl Streep in terms of her acting abilities, I'm not joking at all. And yet I also realize that that statement is really funny. And like I've always like I try and exist in the duality of like understanding that like for many people she is a nostalgia property. She is an actress of the late 90s, early aughts that was in the show Buffy and a few films that people love to like remember once upon a time, you know? But I carry that torch and it's fun. And I also like the fact that it's if I were to have chosen someone like an Ariana Grande, I'd have to share her with so many people. And it's just Sarah Michelle Gellar is my thing. And I have, you know, I'm not the only fan, don't get me wrong, but like I always say, it's like there's a fan community. We're small but mighty, but it's like I don't have to share loving her. So like when we get, you know, a Buffy anniversary or any kind of announcement, you know, of any kind, I feel like it's my moment, you know,
Yeah, right,
it's like,
exactly.
you know, it's like I'm activated and I like not having to share that with anybody else because I'm selfish.
That's totally fair. So I want to talk about, we talked about your interview process. We talked about interviewing, and I know you're someone who has connections and reach, but I'm curious if you could interview anybody on Shut Up Evan, if there is like a pinnacle guest. I mean, obviously, Sarah Michelle Gellar as a guest on that show is pinnacle, but that's the obvious answer, right? Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
If you could interview anyone on Shut Up Evan in season 3, when we get there, who is that person? Who would that dream interview be?
Probably Stephen Sondheim.
That's a good one.
Because one, I feel like he's someone who just about anyone knows his work and has touched his work in some way, whether meaningfully or just knowing that song from Marriage Story. You know what I mean? Yeah. But also I feel like he's someone who so little is known about his character and how much of his work is influenced by himself, by his, you know, his life experiences. And also, I could be wrong about this, but to my understanding, he has never publicly come out of the closet. Like it's always been insinuations. And I just would love to learn more about, because I feel like he has created or had a hand in creating so many iconic female characters on stage that my sense is that they are sort of avatars for either his own experiences or the dreamscapes that he's created in his head. And I would love to explore that with him and just learn more about the person. And I also feel like, going back to what we said earlier, he's just someone that doesn't get interviewed a lot. Yeah. And I always love to speak to people who are not accustomed to being interviewed, or like when Sondheim is interviewed, it would be because he has, you know, the Into the Woods movie is coming out or something. Yeah, yeah. It would never, he seldom would do like he's done Fresh Air a couple of times, but he seldom does an interview that's more holistic and more exploratory of like the human. So that would be who comes to mind.
That's a good answer. It's funny too, because you don't think about the people who aren't interviewed often until you experience an interview of them that you get to hear. Like my favorite one is there was an interview with Gary Oldman after he was the Commissioner Gordon the first time in the Nolan Batman trilogy. And Gary Oldman is a guy who never is himself on camera. He's always got a different voice or a different character. And I remember hearing the interview and they said it's with Gary Oldman. And then I hear this voice and I'm like, I don't know that I've ever heard him speak, not on screen, and like didn't recognize the voice. In a similar way that like when Christian Bale, who had always had a pretty big career, got really huge as Batman, I had no idea he was British because everything I had seen him in up until that point, he had mostly had an American accent. And so I always find getting those tidbits from interviews of people either you're not familiar with or who don't get interviewed a lot really fascinating, you know?
Totally. And there's also a lot of people who just like, in my opinion, interview too often.
Yeah.
And don't sort of allow. A great example of that, actually, it's been on my mind a lot lately, is Mariah Carey,
Yes.
who's currently in a press cycle around her new book. And all I keep thinking is all of the mystique and goodwill that Mariah built over the last 10 years or less, kind of like how Mariah rehabilitated her image and became sort of like this really popular figure online specifically, and sort of bury the memories of sort of like, even from a couple years ago, like all of the lip syncing and just, and anyway, so all the goodwill that she built up, now she is just tweeting up a storm, doing so many interviews, and I can't help but feel like it's like I need her to go away for a while.
Right.
And I hate to say that, it's Mariah Carey. I don't want her to go away, but that's an example of feeling like someone lost a lot of power that I think that they intrinsically have because they were just so willing to give it away.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone who has listened to Shut Up Evan knows that you are a fan of both gay shit and pop culture. It's in the tagline. Let's talk a little bit about the pop culture you're consuming. Now, I know you tease it sometimes on Shut Up Evan. You'll talk about shows that you've been watching. I know you love reality TV. We know you love Buffy and Angel, obviously. But what kind
I don't love Angel.
Oh, really? Do you like Angel?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's fair.
But like I'll see that take come up every once in a while that's like, Angel's a better show than Buffy. And I don't have the energy to like dispel that, but it's just like LOL that like, oh, we're doing takes today.
But is there any pop culture that you're consuming right now in the quarantine that maybe you might not have, or some things that you've fallen in love with? Like, for example, for me, during the quarantine, my spouse and I discovered Schitt's Creek, which had been on for a while by the time we discovered it. And we fell in love with the show. We watched it from beginning to end. We bought the final season so we could watch it right away. Has there been any shows like that you've just dived into for the first time during quarantine?
I mean, you're going to be sick of hearing me talk about it, but yes, there is. So I started Survivor in quarantine actually maybe like a few weeks before quarantine. I want to say in February.
Okay.
But basically I had been seeing a lot of discourse on Twitter from people whose opinions and tastes I trust. And so like I posted a tweet from February being like, okay, if I'm going to do this, and it was my understanding that there were 40 seasons, which seemed ambitious. And I was like, if I'm going to do this, can someone give me like a starter season to sort of, give me a temperature read early on as to whether or not this is culture for me. And so everyone had a lot of opinions, the internet, crazy.
Right.
And everyone kept being like, start with Pearl Island season 7. So I did. Very, very into it. And then sort of like I have a very historian-like quality about me. So like when it comes to Sarah Michelle Gellar or The View or The Real Housewives, when I like something, I need to have like an encyclopedic knowledge of it, because that's sort of like my happy place. Like I like to know. It's like the hours I spend researching Survivor shit now. It's insane. But anyway, at that point I was like, okay, I'm into this now. So let's reverse engineer and start this journey from the beginning. So we went back to season 1. Anyway, I'm now currently watching season 16.
Wow.
So I've completed 15 seasons, and I've just never felt this way about something before. But beyond the show itself, I have discovered this podcast called Survivor Historians. Mm-hmm. And it's about as long as the show itself. They do usually about between like 9 to 10 hours on a specific season.
Oh, wow.
And just learning all of like the behind the scenes stuff. I'm both fascinated by like the show, but also like the world of the show. And then also like as someone who, I have like my worlds of things like Drag Race, etc. And it's like, I just didn't know there was this world of Survivor, and not just the, what happens on the island those 39 days, that aspect. And I'll give you like an example of a fact that I just learned that I was like really interested in. So I just finished watching Fiji season 14, a remarkably bad season. I would say the second worst season that I've watched so far after Thailand, maybe even worse than Thailand. And I noticed the fact that it's a very, very diverse cast. And famously, Survivor season 13, Cook Islands, had 4 tribes of 5 people. Each of those 4 tribes were different ethnicities, and that became very, very controversial at the time.
Right.
But one of the results of that was that 3/4 of the cast was non-white.
Yeah.
And so going into Fiji, it has the same setup, although it's not divided by race, but the cast is comprised of 3/4 people of color. And so automatically you're just getting so much more rich storytelling because the tapestry is allowing, it's like the very premise of the show is like 16 people from different walks of life. So it's already such a better season to begin with. Also, notably, top 3 are all Black individuals. It's the only time in Survivor history, to my knowledge, because I've only seen these 15 seasons. Anyway, I'm listening to the Historians podcast, and I learned that Mark Burnett, the creator of Survivor, one of the big reasons why he hates Fiji is because famously there is a 20th. I'm sorry to go this deep.
No, it's good. This is great. I love it.
But there was a contestant who was supposed to be on the show that dropped out on the boat ride over to the island. You never see her. Her name is Melissa McNulty.
Oh, wow.
And she was a big-breasted blonde woman, which apparently is Mark Burnett's. Mark Burnett apparently, allegedly, has 2 favorite kinds of players: big-breasted blonde women and sort of like alpha males.
Right.
Colby Donaldson from Australia being like one of the first prototypes of that. And he famously, Mark Burnett, does not like Fiji, not because it's people of color, but because of the fact that because Melissa dropped out, there were no big blonde women on that season. And you will see in subsequent seasons after Fiji, I'm only 2 seasons after that, but sort of like an influx of big-breasted blonde women. And it's just really interesting looking at that from that vantage point and seeing like Mark Burnett and his little, evil puppeteering of this show. But I just love facts like that. Yeah. I love excuse me, let me be clear. I don't love big-breasted blonde women. Well, I don't dislike big-breasted, whatever. Anyway, but I love that aspect of it. So anyway, Survivor.
See, and what's interesting about I know tons of folks who watch reality TV as it's happening. I had a huge connection to Drag Race even before I watched any of it or met anyone from it because I was involved in the burlesque scene and the drag scene in New York a bit. And everybody talked about it, for better or worse, everybody talked about it. So I knew it. And I've watched bits and pieces of reality shows here and there, but it's just not a thing that I've watched deeply. But I'm always fascinated why people watch it. And even more so when someone like you wants to go back and watch old seasons where there's no stakes. You could look up who wins, but there's stakes for you because you're experiencing it for the first time. And I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah. And also, right now I'm on Micronesia, so I'm on one of the second All-Star season. And I think my sensibility, both as a reality television consumer, but also this actually just kind of speaks to my taste, is that I love a returning player narrative. I love that. I love when a Real Housewife comes back for their second season. That is always my favorite because it's you've had an opportunity to inflect upon the you that you presented on television, and it's your opportunity to course correct. And that's why I love an All-Stars Drag Race. I love, again, a Real Housewives second season, but what I'm loving about this current season and what I think becomes a big part of the Survivor lore is the returning player aspect. I just love watching people trying to figure out how to present a better version of their performance of themselves.
I really like that. That's really interesting. And it's funny too, because as an actor, you're always evolving what you are. And to say that these people aren't acting to some degree, even us now, the way we're talking now is not the way we'd be talking if the mics aren't on. There's a level of performance, when you're on, as they say in show business. And so I always find that kind of stuff really fascinating. And even with talking to people who are celebrities on one scale or another, how will they be? Will they be like I imagine they'll be? Will they be something else? You never really know. And I think that part of the reason I got into interviewing, well, selfishly, it was because I wanted to do it. And I had a microphone. I was like, sure, I'll do it. Why not? I didn't know any better to stop myself at the time. But also now it's getting to know people on a level that you might not otherwise know them, because people will say different things on the microphone than they will off, or, off video or whatever. And I think that kind of stuff is really fascinating.
Totally.
All right, before we wrap up, the next thing I wanted to ask is about 2020. So your season is coming back amidst 2020 and everything that's been going on, and
what's been going on.
And it is hard. There are many moments where because I have a podcast that comes out almost every day at this point, which is a little insane, I have to admit, even to myself. there are moments where I'm like, why? Why am I even bothering? Because of everything that we're all going through as a nation, in the world, and then my own personal strife, which people have heard about on this show and your show. Like, how do you keep going in 2020? How do you keep writing, keep making things, especially when so much horrible shit is happening right now, and we're barreling towards an election with an unknown result, and people are still being treated without equality on so many different levels? Like, what keeps you motivated? What keeps you going?
Well, I thought about that recently when I was looking at some of the collections. So right now we're in fashion month and we're starting to see the first looks from the spring summer 2021 season. And I remember like having a little bit of like apathy when I was first seeing some of the images coming out and just being like, I don't have the wherewithal to like talk about fashion. I was like, this just isn't the time. But then I got to thinking about it more and I was like, well, a lot of like young, creative people are putting their heart and soul, their time, their energy, their money, their hearts into making this. So like, yes, there are the Donatella Versace's who could I deal with seeing less? Yes. But there are a lot of people in this moment who are like busting their ass. And I feel like it is incumbent upon people like me not to act as though this moment doesn't exist, but to realize that like I have a function within the wheel of it all. I'm a little inarticulate, but like I have a function here, right? And it's like I have a platform and I feel like, so that's one thing. It's like, I feel like I want to continue to talk about fashion and I want to find meaningful ways to talk about fashion. And I want to celebrate the good fashion that I'm seeing. And fashion is beauty and fashion makes people so happy. And fashion is an ecosystem where a lot of people like literally rely on fashion to pay their bills. And so I do think that like, do I think that me featuring a brand on my Instagram is going to like make them big? No, but not for nothing. I do feel like, anybody that has any kind of following, you are giving exposure to a brand. And I would like to believe it's like you build trust in your audience. And so I want to show them the people that I think are doing amazing things. And not everybody has the ability to stop writing, to stop creating, to back away from this moment. And so that's one aspect of it. And then the second part is like, I like making people laugh. And I'm not a comedian. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I think one thing you would take away from hearing me in an interview setting is like, I'm not laugh out loud funny. But like, I had this instance yesterday. This stuff kind of happens to me sometimes where I posted this, I made a little grid on my Instagram of all of these different Sarah Paulson wigs.
Oh, I did see this on your Instagram, yeah.
And then Kristen Chenoweth commented on it saying, And then Sarah Paulson, the original post was Sarah Paulson wigs.
Yeah.
I tagged Sarah Paulson. Anyway, Kristen Chenoweth comments, Sarah Paulson comments, I'm like, ooh, what's the tea? So I go and I go into the Broadway.com archives and I found an interview with Sarah Paulson talking about Kristen Chenoweth rather shadily. And then I learned that Sarah Paulson played a version of Kristen Chenoweth on Studio 60 in the Sunset Strip, which was created by Aaron Sorkin, who used to date Kristen Chenoweth, who depicted the character of Kristen Chenoweth in not such a likable way. Anyway, this to say, chronicling, like finding that clip, clipping it out, posting it on Instagram, and creating this sort of like, and again, I was I stirring the pot? Absolutely, but also like the people gave me ingredients with which to stir that pot. So, but that is an example of like, I got so many DMs about just how gripped people were by like figuring this out. And it's stuff like that like, I think that I have, for whatever reason, both of those fantastic actresses feel they want to play on my comment section, which I'm very grateful for. But that's an example of like, we can have fun. It's not, there's a lot of serious things going on in the world. It's not taking away from that, but like it's, I have a usefulness in this situation, which is to try and I wouldn't call it joy. I feel like that's a little like self-congratulatory, but it's like I think that I can provide some sort of escapism and BS. And, I just did this interview with like the actor in Lady Gaga's new 911 video. And it's like, I was going through like my questions and they were all like, what was it like being on set, blah, blah, blah. And then I just was like, have you been to the planet Chromatica? I was like, I want to know. Yeah. And it's like stuff like that. When I was crafting my questions, it's like, that's the best question amongst these questions. And it's like, it's a throwaway question, but I guess I use that as an example of like, there's plenty of time to have the serious conversations, and we should have them. But I also think there's time for bullshit and frivolity and meaninglessness. And so I kind of just try and do a little bit of both. And I also I'm not someone who what I post specifically on my Instagram story, because that's like kind of my medium of choice, is just kind of like, I try and just not really think about it too much and just, and have it be an extension of me. And also like, we talk a lot about like the performance of our online self.
Yep.
I try and like, I don't really see my presence on social media as being that there has to be some distance, right?
Sure.
But like, I don't see it being that different from if you really know me. Like that's me. And the hyperbole of the language on social, it's hyperbole that I use in my everyday lexicon. So it's like, I just kind of see this as being an outpouring of all this stuff in my head. And if you don't like it, and there are plenty of people that don't follow along.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's what kind of made me see the matrix code, so to speak, to use a dated reference, in social media is, first of all, focusing on multiple platforms is almost impossible. But like, once I deleted Facebook from my phone and mostly stopped using it and focused on Twitter and just kind of let it be another appendage, I enjoyed it more. I cared a lot less about the people who didn't like me or didn't want to see it. And it just made it translated in a way that it didn't before, because I kept trying to like make it more than it was. When I actually got more closer to my podcasting and the things I loved and saying stupid shit that was on my mind, that's when I got more people paying attention. And it's not that I want the attention, but it's more like you. I want to, if I can bring a moment of escape for someone, like even listening to this interview, that they're not thinking about something that's really bothering them or that's really horrible or whatever, I'm happy to provide that. And I also understand that if people ignore it because they're too busy being involved in the conversation or trying to do what's right or trying to make big moves, I also get that too. Like, I think that we kind of need it all in this day and age.
And I feel like, all of the guests that I have booked on Shut Up Evan have been, for the most part, have been connections that I made through social media that I consider really authentic connections. Like, these people are not my friends, but it's like, I love nothing more than DMing with a celebrity. And so I see this platform as an opportunity to, yes, there's all the bullshit and all the toxicity that certainly exists, but I think that there are a lot of like wonderful things about, and also just like, I will have so many conversations, like so many conversations with people, because I'm really into voice memos on Instagram, and I will have random people that listen to the podcast that, even today, we talked about Ellen DeGeneres on today's show, and I had all these voice memos from people being like, "Oh, you didn't talk about the Kevin Hart, blah blah blah." And it's like, let's speak on it. Let's talk about it now. Or even people will message me after something crazy will happen on The View, and like people will message me. And it's like, I want to talk about The View, and so if you do too, you've come to the right place. That's how I feel about it. It's like, if we share our interests, and again, going back to like micro interests, it's like Buffy. It's like to me, it's like Drag Race is a lot less interesting of a subject to sort of like get super deep into, just because everyone's watching it. But it's like, when it comes to The View, when it comes to Survivor, when it comes to finding something that's a little bit more niche. Obviously, like, I realize these are not like small potatoes things, but that to me, it's like getting to like riff with a stranger about The View, like, sign me up. Like, yes, let's do it.
Yeah, I've found that I've had more lasting conversations with people about a thing I'm passionate about than like talking about like the bigger subjects. Like, the nicher stuff tends to bring more people out. And like, one of my podcasts started as me and a friend having an infatuated love of a game series, and then now, since its release, we have tons of people who want to talk about these games that I had no idea the community was what it was until you start talking about it. And that's more fun to me. Like the highest praise I can have ever, and like I feel like I've made it as a podcaster. Someone made fan art about a stupid thing I said on an episode of one of my podcasts that I haven't thought about since I said it. And to me, that's like, as someone who's creating in a modern age, that is like the ultimate form of flattery. 100%.
Completely.
Well, Evan, this has been a delight. It's so nice to be on this side of the interviewing chair. I should have let you ask me a question, like I ask questions on our show.
The day will come. The day will come.
But that said, before I have you do our sign off, tell people where they can find you and where they can find Shut Up Evan.
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Evan Ross Katz. And if you just hold down my story, you can hit mute because I tend to talk a lot. And then you can find Shut Up Evan on anywhere that podcasts are available. It comes out every other Tuesday. And we just released episode 2 today. So we've got 16 more great episodes coming out this season. And you can backlog and listen to all 18 episodes from season 1.
Yes. And you can also join Evan's Patreon, patreon.com/shutupevan, where you get behind the scenes stuff. You get videos, full format interviews before they're edited, all sorts of really great stuff. And you support something that we're both really proud of. You like how I just slid that pitch right in there?
I love, it's literally, it's like something I keep saying to myself. It's like, I hate encouraging people. This is a whole other thing. But anyways, like I need to get better at messaging the Patreon. So anyway, I appreciate you coming forward and helping. Yes, please subscribe to the Patreon.
But now I'm going to ask you to sign off the show. So we have a saying on the show, which is music is life and life is good. That saying is born out of this idea. I used to do a music review show, but also this idea that if you're creating art, then life isn't that bad, even when you're going through harder times like we are now.
Music is life and life is good.
That's it for this episode of Crash Chords Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and Facebook. You'll help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email matt.storm@crashchords.com or hit us up on Twitter at CrashCordsWeb. Thanks for listening.
Hi, this is Victor Devon, and I am the host of We Burlesque, the podcast. Every Monday, I talk to fabulous denizens of nightlife, including burlesque performers, both seasoned and new to the form, drag performers, performance artists, DJs, and artists who make up their respective scenes. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Please visit WeBurlesque.com to check out episode recaps and see all the formats available. And remember that music is life. Life is good.